And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. This is Irreverent, Faith and Current Affairs.
Welcome back to Irreverent, Faith and Current Affairs with me, Jamie Franklin. We've been away for a few weeks, so it's very, very exciting to be back, and I feel happy to be with you. And I'm also happy to be joined by Daniel French, a legendary vicar of Sulcombe. And where else are you, Daniel? Marlborough,
Galpton, Hope Cove.
Is it really called Hope Cove?
Yeah, Hope Cove. We've actually got a little sign halfway through the village which says Outer Hope.
Oh,
It's become a very famous little postcard that I've seen all around the country, where you can have a postcard that says you are now in Outer Hope.
Right, okay. And whether you're going in or out of it is symbolically very significant, I suppose.
It's this podcast, really, isn't it?
Outer Hope. Yeah. We could change the name and all the branding. We could just have that picture of the sign as the branding. That would be good.
I mean, it's an awesome village, actually, Hope Cove. It's a sort of mini Sulcombe, which they'll probably really loathe me saying, but it is a beautiful little village. And they've got a bit of a backstory in that they have their own lifeboat. It's not part of the RLNI.
Right.
So they fundraised it. And there was a whole sort of Braveheart, you can take away our lifeboat, but you can't take away our hope, sort of thing.
Right.
That was very funny. And a number of our parishioners worked really hard. I mean, raised hundreds of thousands of pounds to basically have their own operation. And it was all to do with some sort of health and safety question that I think about 10 years ago, the National Institution told them off for rescuing somebody or something like this. I don't want to do a disservice.
They told them off for rescuing somebody.
Yes, it was all right.
Was it a dangerous rescue?
It was a dangerous
They should have
rescue.
They should have
gone out on it and what have you. And so they decided, we'll set up our own lifeboat. Yeah.
You know what, Daniel? That reminds me of the parable of the lost sheep. Because there's danger involved in rescue, isn't there? There's risk involved in it, and sometimes health and safety, although ideally you'd like to observe it, sometimes you just can't, can you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a parable that shows that they had the vision to be tenacious and to go to leapfrog the health and safety culture. Yeah. But it says a lot about the age, doesn't it?
I think it does, and I think there's I've been meditating in the last 3 seconds on the verse which says the letter kills, but the spirit gives life. And I think that's in a way that's like got a very sort of specific theological application in the context. But it's just so insightful for life in general. That is the truth, isn't it? The letter is intended to bring structure and order and control, but actually what the letter inevitably ends up doing is choking the life out of people, communities, societies, and so on. And actually, it's the spirit that brings life. It's the power that animates us. It's our consciences, it's our emotions, it's the things which inspire us. Those are the things in life which are really important. And those are the things which cause us to do great things. And that's why in every story, it's the bureaucrats who are the bad guys, because they're always trying to shut everything down.
Yeah, no, I agree. We've had a story in our parish that has been rather glorious, actually. That's in the last couple of weeks. We rebooted what was the Sulcombe Community Gospel Choir, which during COVID tide and just the way that things go had gone into abeyance a bit. I mean, it was down to sort of a few dozen people. My wife had founded it about
Sounds pretty good, though. Ago. A few dozen people is still pretty good, Daniel.
About a few dozen people, just...
Yeah.
And they were pretty much about to pack up. Anyway, we had a partnership because gospel choirs partner with other gospel choirs, so one becomes the mentor to the other. And we were partnered up with the Canton Community Gospel Choir from Cornwall, and their director offered to take it over, and he's a deeply devout Christian with an amazing faith story. Who I think you could probably go on YouTube, and I'm sure local TV and things have done stuff about him and how he's taken this choir from zero to something. He's a sort of local Gareth Malone.
Yeah.
So he's come over and taken over the gospel choir, which were just so timely. And last week I walked in to see how they were doing. I thought they actually do fairly well, because there hasn't really been in the town many clubs or things to go to. And there were 50 people there.
Wow, brilliant.
Singing, and he's just an amazing conductor. He brings other people in to kind of conduct various parts of the choir and whatever. And it was just amazing to see this wall of sound. People I came into Amazing Grace, actually.
Oh, lovely.
They have a version of Amazing Grace, which uses a line, I think, from Coldplay as a chorus.
Right.
It was just astonishing. And then yesterday I went with my wife, and again, it had gone up. It was now in the 60s. In fact, he said, we're actually up to capacity in terms of what I can handle as a director. And it was amazing to see everyone smiling, singing, full, joy. Loads of people who don't normally come to church saying this is wonderful. And he says to them, a lot of you don't know what you're doing, but in worshiping, you're setting a fire within yourselves and this town that is going to counter, get this, the narrative of fear.
Oh, lovely. That's good. He sounds like a good man.
He said that all around the country, because he's in touch with loads of choirs. He said loads of choirs at the moment. Though there was this pickup with Zoom choirs about 2 years ago, there's actually a lot of choirs are falling apart. And people are really struggling to get people back into things. And he said this is the only church I know, I've heard of, where a choir is actually having this tremendous renewal. Every other story is downward. And he said, I don't understand it. He said it feels like something beyond him, something transcendent is actually pushing here. And I said, well, we've, a number of us within the team in the parish have actually tried to sow the ground over the last 2 years, and I've had traction at times for doing this, to say that we cannot walk in fear, we must walk in faith.
Yes.
And that if we do that, something more than just singing will happen.
Yes, amen. That's brilliant. Well,
so
in a way, it's kind of like, you can say, well, it's mysterious, and the spirit blows where it will, the wind blows where it will, and so on, John chapter 3. But then also you can point to your faithfulness in scattering the seed, in laying the good foundation in the midst of opposition, in a way, in an obscure place over the last 2 years. But because of your faithfulness, the Spirit is now blowing on these endeavors in your context. And let's talk about that in a minute, Daniel, a little bit more and dig into it. But I want to just give some notices at the beginning of the show. So really exciting news is that we have Paula Boddington joining us in about 40 minutes. Paula is the Associate Professor of Philosophy and Healthcare at the University of West London, and she's a specialist in medical ethics. And she's going to be talking to us about her reaction to calls for universal vaccination. In particular, she wants to make some comments about some intervention by high-profile churchmen, such as the Archbishop of Canterbury, and indeed, I'm sure we'll ask her about the Pope's comments this week as well. So she'll be joining us in about 40 minutes. And that leads me on to this new innovation that I've just told you about just before the show, Daniel. I think for lots of people, they love this part of the show. They couldn't do without it. But what I'm going to do this week as an experiment is I'm going to release the episode totally as normal on Friday. So don't panic. It will all be released as normal. But I am going to clip the interview. I'm going to make a separate podcast and video with the interview with Paula, and I'm going to release that on Tuesday. So there will be an episode which is just the interview with Paula. And the point of that is that it will give people who listen to the show an opportunity to be able to share something with friends and family, or if you just want the interview for whatever reason, that will become available on Tuesday. So you won't have to put up with any of this, deeply spiritual and intellectual banter between some random vicars. You'll have the interview itself. So that will be available on Tuesdays. And if that goes well, Daniel, I'll do it every week, because it's not a huge amount of extra work or anything. And I'd love to give people something which can be used as a resource, which can be shared with family and friends. So if this is a particularly live issue, as it is for so many people, this issue of the ethics around vaccination and whether we should be vaccinated or not, and blah, 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 then you'll just have the interview and you can just share it. You don't have to say, fast forward to minute like 44 or something. So that's my idea, Daniel.
Yeah, and we encourage people to share these interviews as much as they can on social media. I think Paula, as people will see, is a significant voice, I think, really in this debate and reflection.
Yeah, she's fantastic. She's been on Jonathan Pageau's podcast a couple of times, hasn't she? And I'm sure
she speaks very well into the whole sense of us entering into a sort of digital dystopia. The whole metaverse thing is something that she speaks of with a precision and intelligence.
She's a very, very important thinker, I think, and we're going to really enjoy our conversation with her quite shortly. And it's a real honor that she's coming on the show.
Exciting stuff.
Yeah, it's going to be good. It's going to be good. And as I say, fast forward if you like, but we've got some good stuff coming up. I've got a couple more notices as well. Opportunity, if you want to be at something I'm going to be at, and something I think Tom is going to be at as well. I haven't had 100% confirmation, but Tom is hoping to come. I'm going to be at an event on the 5th of March, which is Saturday, in Colchester, which is the town I grew up in after a fashion. I actually grew up on Mersey Island, but Colchester's right next door. And we are going to be in partnership with some churches in Colchester, hosting Andrea Williams, who is I don't know what her title is, but she's basically the head of Christian Concern. And she's going to be addressing a gathered group there in a church in Colchester. And then I think what's going to happen is we're going to have a dialogue, which I'll host, and Tom, if he's there as well, will host as well. But it's basically an opportunity for you to come and see something that we're doing live in the flesh, and it'd be lovely to meet people if they can make it to that event. Now, details haven't been finalized apart from those that I've given you. I just wanted to do a kind of, firstly, a save the date thing, 5th of March, Saturday. And secondly, to say the details will be made available, and it's going to be a booking system because there's limited space. Tickets are going to be £5, just so that people don't buy tickets and then don't show up. And as soon as I get this information, I'm going to put it on our Telegram, which is t.me/irreverendpod. I'm going to put it out on Twitter at irreverendpod. And I'm going to put it on our Patreon as well, patreon.com/irreverend. So if you want to be among the first to know about this event, and you don't want to miss out, join one of those things. Follow us on Twitter, go on our Telegram, or sponsor us on Patreon, which you can do for £1.50 plus VAT if you're in the UK. A month. It's not very much. It's like 50p a week, which is, it's not very much. So if you want to be among the first to know when the booking is open, where the event is, and so on, do those things. But I think it's going to be a really good event. We're going to call it something like Church Under Fire, Advancing Christianity in Modern Britain. And so we're going to be talking about the salient issues from the perspective of Andrea and Christian Concern. I know they're very interested in issues around religious freedom, free speech, particularly as far as the Christian message is concerned, and various other things. And of course, I'll be trying to bring in my agenda as well, like I always do, to everything. So 5th of March in Colchester, that's going to be made available soon. And I really hope...
wonder if that would that be live streamed?
Oh, I haven't worked this out yet, Daniel. It's a technological issue. I'd love it if we could live stream it or at least record it, but we're looking into that.
Okay.
I think at the very least we'll get an audio recording of it.
And for those who are new to the idea, who haven't heard of Telegram, just explain Telegram, because I've heard a few people say, what's Telegram?
Yeah, Telegram is a social media app. It's a bit like Twitter, but the difference is that on Telegram you join somebody's channel. So we have a channel, and you just join the channel, and then all the people on the channel are people who have chosen to join the channel. The channel administrator, on our group is me, is the only person that can post. So I post stuff, and then people can have conversations underneath the post. And actually Telegram, I enjoy a lot more than Twitter, because people opt into your channel. So people want to be there. So it's not like this kind of knife fight that you get on Twitter where everyone's just chucked in together and they're all arguing all the time. It's a really nice.
I don't know what you mean.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, me neither. Yeah, me neither. But it's a really nice thing, Telegram. So it's a bit tricky to use at first, but once you've worked it out and you've got on a channel, then it's all straightforward. So
and it's available as an app on smartphones. Is it available on desktops?
Yeah, you can get it. You can certainly get it on the Mac, because I've got it on my Mac, and I assume that therefore you can get it on Windows as well. So it's a little bit tricky, and if you can't install it, get someone to help you to do it. But once you're on, it's really, really simple. It's my favorite social media. I don't know about you, Daniel, but I don't even use Facebook anymore. I can't be doing with it. It seems to me very dated. And Telegram's where it's at, as far as I'm concerned.
I suppose Facebook I probably use mainly for parish notices, to be honest.
Yeah.
I fear sometimes that when it's used in a Twitter-esque kind of way, I just don't want to get involved, because it's, as a parish priest, you don't want to start getting into political and ideological rows with people over their posts. So I almost wish I could actually, and probably I will actually, just withdraw from Facebook, aside from the parish presence.
Yeah, I have a real problem with Facebook ideologically as well, because I don't like this metaverse that Mark Zuckerberg is trying to plunge us into. It doesn't appeal to me, and I'm ideologically opposed to it. But Daniel, I think we should move on because we've got contents, and we're going to do a brief Bible reading first. But I think we should let's say the Lord's Prayer together to still our hearts and our minds before we read the Word of God. So let us pray. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so today we're in Revelation chapter 2, and we're reading the letter to the church in Smyrna. So it's just a few verses.
Where's Smyrna, just to give folks back?
It's somewhere in Mesopotamia, isn't it? I haven't actually. Daniel, I don't know. Where is it? It's somewhere.
Milton Keynes.
Is it in Greece? Is it in Turkey? It's probably in Turkey, isn't it? I don't know. You know what, Daniel? I did have an interesting fact about Smyrna, not its geographical location, but the church fathers make an association between Smyrna and myrrh, and that will become clear in the reading, because it's about death and rebirth. Right now, that's embarrassing, because I have actually read the section in the Ancient Christian Commentary on Scripture, but it doesn't actually mention where it is, but it's probably in Turkey. I'm going to guess Turkey. Okay.
Apologies for those in Turkey if it's in Greece, but we'll find out. We'll
it's either Greece or Turkey, isn't it? Or somewhere nearby. Okay, there we are. And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write the words of the first and the last, who died and came to life. I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich, and the slander of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and for 10 days you will have tribulation. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who conquers shall not be hurt by the second death. So that's the letter. So I think in a way, the message of this letter is very, very clear and easy to understand, and really kind of central, foundational to the existence of the church and to the Christian life, which is about being faithful to God and identifying with the sufferings of Christ when we are persecuted. And it's interesting, in these letters all the way through, you have this kind of ambivalence between being poor and rich, and how the materially rich are said to be spiritually poor. and the spiritually poor, the materially poor in this case are said to be spiritually rich. So that's the dynamic. In the eyes of the world, the church is poor, the church is beleaguered, the church is persecuted, the church is slandered. But actually, because the church is faithful to God and to what God is calling it to, the church is blessed. And the church will, as a result, conquer and shall not be hurt by the second death. And this is why the address at the beginning is so important. So, as I've said, the name Smyrna is associated with myrrh by some of the church fathers. I mean, there's a Christological association there because it's about death, the myrrh that Christ is given as a baby, foreshadowing his death. And then the attribution, the words of the first and the last, so that's Jesus Christ, who died and came to life. So the church, in its suffering, in its being persecuted, is associated with Christ, who died, who went through suffering, who went through persecution, and then was brought to life again by the Holy Spirit of God. And then there's one other detail here I just wanted to draw out, which is, it says, Christ knows the slander of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. And we have to be careful here that to point out that the way that the word Jews is functioning in this is actually as a positive thing. They're saying we're Jews. In other words, I think what they're saying is we are truly members of the church. We're true Jews. So that's a positive thing. It's like saying I'm a Christian, right? It's a good thing. They say they are Jews, but
we're sort of people of the book. We're monotheists. We're not pagans. We're pious believers.
Exactly. So it's not some kind of like anti-Semitic slur or something like that, but they're not. They're a synagogue of Satan. And the church fathers agree, as far as I can tell, that we're talking about people within the church persecuting faithful believers in the same church. And this dynamic,
outrageous. I've never heard of that happening ever before, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, but I mean, in all seriousness, it's a scriptural reality. From the beginning of Scripture to the very end. The prophets were persecuted by Israel, by the people of God. And in the New Testament, the same dynamic occurs in the Gospels, because Christ is persecuted by the religious officials, by the scribes and Pharisees and Sadducees and so on. The same thing happens in the book of Acts, and the same thing is alluded to time and time again all the way through the epistles, and indeed in the book of Revelation. So this is a reality that the church itself is a contested space in which righteousness and wickedness, in which truth and lies are at odds with one another. So in a way, it's kind of a bit of a downer, but we have to be realistic, and we have to be, forewarned is forearmed type thing. So there we are. Those are my thoughts.
To give our listeners who may be more unfamiliar with the first century, I suppose the stats would be, we're probably looking worldwide in the Roman Empire of 100 million, 25 to 50,000 people.
Yep.
And what the book of Revelation is demonstrating is that when the church comes under fire, even in this context, this little embryonic new religion, the majority of churches are failing under pressure. It's 6 out of 7 are falling apart catastrophically. I mean, one of the unspoken presumptions of the book of Revelation is that many, when faced with persecution, or maybe even the ultimate sacrifice, which normally involved giving incense to Caesar, acknowledging him as the Son of God rather than Jesus Christ, is that a large number of people apostatized. And Revelation, I think, speaks into history powerfully in saying that do not be unnerved by the fact that many will fall away. And churches will systemically fail, and they'll fail for different reasons. But the righteous church, which will have the most heat on it, will be the one that rises.
Yep. Amen. And that's so pertinent to what we've experienced over the last couple of years. And in a way, I think I mean, you've been at this much longer than I have, Daniel, but I think, we haven't really seen anything quite like this certainly in our lifetimes. But I think in the West, for many hundreds of years, that really the church has been involved, I would say, in the last 2 years in catastrophic failure to speak prophetically and to act prophetically in the midst of what I consider just to be widespread evil. I don't want to speak for you, but that's my feeling. And as we've been saying, in your case, but also I think it's just an empirical reality that the churches that have resisted, and to use the words of Jonathan Pageau, they've valued communion over safety. God has blessed those churches. They've kept their congregations, and in many cases, those churches have grown. And people have had to do this at great personal cost, because they have been opposed for not going along with the narrative. And actually, Daniel, I mean, let's get into this, because it seems to me now, I don't know what your take is, but I think even over the last few weeks, we are seeing a sea change in the coverage around COVID-19. It is now being widely admitted that the lockdowns were a policy mistake. And even in the mainstream media, they are being denounced as immoral because they damage so badly the poor and the marginalized and the forgotten of society. We also have this situation now where the hypocrisy, the rank hypocrisy of the elitists who are telling us all that we couldn't see our dying relatives, who were telling us that we couldn't meet as churches. They were having bring your own booze parties in the middle of the lockdowns.
I remember at one point being told that it was too dangerous for me to enter even my church unless I was going in there, with a clipboard to do a health and safety audit.
Yeah.
And yet it would seem that in Downing Street, a different reality was being played out.
Yeah. And this, it comes back to me to the, wise as serpents, as innocent as doves. So in a sense, the church may have been as innocent as a dove in all of this, but it has failed to be as wise as a serpent and to be sufficiently informed to make a proper evaluation of whether or not what was going on was right, whether it was necessary, whether it was effective, whether it was moral. Church hasn't done that, but the church hasn't discerned the character and the nature of the people who were making these decisions. And we don't want to be pharisaical, but we don't want to be judgmental, but we need to be discerning about what is going on and whether or not the people who are saying X, Y, and Z are worthy of our trust. And I think what we're seeing now is that, I think Daniel was putting his cat out.
It's a very big cat.
Yes. I think what we're seeing now is that these people are just not trustworthy. They're not trustworthy, and they have, by engaging in these hypocritical actions, they have lost their credibility. Now, I'm not one of these people who calls for people to resign or anything like that. And in many ways, I'd be worried if, say, Boris Johnson did resign, what would happen next, because it could be that we'd have someone come in and plunge us into the whole round of restrictions and vaccine passports and so on. So I'm not saying necessarily that we should do that. But what I'm saying is that the church needs to learn its lesson here. We need to be more discerning. We need to rediscover our prophetic function, which is to be a moral voice in society and to say, now, hang on a second. What about the poor? What about the marginalized? What about single mothers in council flats with 2 or 3 children who are locked in as prisoners for 2 to 3 months a year, while you are having your bring your own booze garden party in number 10 Downing Street? There is a moral double standard here, which we must be aware of, and the church must call out, and the church must learn from.
But I think the church, particularly official organs of the church, won't do that until they acknowledge the supernatural roots of their religion.
Right.
To quote Tom Holland in the question that Gavin Ashenden put to him in his recent lecture, I mean, Tom is a historian and has written the great Dominion bestseller. He's
very welcome on this pod if he wants to come on, by the way.
Tom,
if anyone knows him, he's very welcome.
Self-avowed agnostic, I think, but very, very sympathetic to Christianity and our Christian roots as a culture. And Tom's, said how disappointed he has been with the official churches, who particularly during the pandemic have given us nothing of any substance to chew over. When really what we need to have grasped is the sacred, spiritual, supernatural dimension to our faith. That that it's communion, not safety, as you said, as Jonathan Pageau had said, and we need to accept that all our ideas as a civilization about human rights, civil liberties, come back to the scriptural story, and that scriptural story is in many ways weird. It has angels and demons, it has miracles, it has a God who talks to Moses on the top of a mountain, it has a crucified Messiah who rises from the dead. And I think that whole worldview has been embarrassing to a large noted powerful section within the churches who wanted to play that down and rather appeal the whole thing to trendy, fashionable political views. Well, it's easier to talk about climate change than it is, say, to talk about the miracles in the gospel, because they're seen as a turn off and unmodern. And that has been a critical error.
I agree. The way it looks, Daniel, is that the church, and we don't know what's going on inside people's minds and hearts, but the way it looks is that the church is more interested in using this as a PR opportunity than it was in being faithful and in doing the right thing. And the thing about that is that it will all come out in the wash. It will all come out. The truth will eventually out in this situation. And I hope and pray that we are actually seeing the beginning of this now, as public opinion is turning against lockdowns, against enforced mask wearing when there's no evidence for their efficacy, against universal coercive measures to try and force vaccination on people, against vaccine passports, which people are realizing are divisive and unnecessary and discriminatory, and against, apart from anything else, against our cultural spirit as free English people. The narrative is turning, and as we've said over and over again, as the narrative turns, the people who have supported it history will not be kind to them. And it wouldn't be a problem. It doesn't matter if history is not kind to you. It doesn't matter if you've been faithful and if you've done the right thing, because that's the way things go. But when you haven't done the right thing, then you've got the worst of both worlds, haven't you? Because you weren't right to begin with. You haven't got the credibility that you were seeking, and now everyone can see that your response has actually been morally torporous and even bankrupt. And so my hope is that we engage in some real repentance and say, we haven't got this right. Christianity is a religion of grace and forgiveness and second chances. And the church, the only road that is now open for the church is to repent of its complicity with moral evil and to say, we were duped, we were naive, our priorities were wrong, and now we're going to refocus on preaching the gospel, on making disciples, and on fulfilling our mission. I think that's the only way. Which is interesting because we've got on the Question the Rev section, Daniel, Question the Rev, our new section, which we never actually leave time for, even though people write really good questions. So we got
from the Telegram. This is on
Twitter. It's on Twitter.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an open question on Twitter. So one person on Twitter, Robert Jones, says, are we seeing the beginning of a Christian revival in the West? The pandemic seems to have opened people up to the faith, as has the Jordan Peterson phenomenon, etc. As a millennial who has gone from an atheist to Catholic, I see this happening a lot in my generation. Now hold that thought, Daniel, because we've also got an interesting article in the Telegraph, which is headlined, Sunday church service attendance almost halves in 30 years, figures show. And this is speaking specifically about the Church of England. So Sunday service attendance has halved in 30 years. Clergy warn that priests covering more than one parish has sparked a loss of confidence in the church. The figures are shocking, Daniel. So I was actually born in 1987. Between 1987 and 2019, the number, this is of regular Sunday worshippers, the number fell from around 1.2 million to 679,000. The Church of England's Sunday worshippers have halved in 30 years. In London, over the same time period, good news, church-going increased from 52,700 to 53,600, which is an increase of 1.7%. So it's not a huge increase, but at least it's an increase. And in a couple of other dioceses as well, I'm just going down to the chart, which are Worcester and Coventry, there's been a very, very slight increase as well. But in every single other diocese in the Church of England, we have seen decline, and in some cases, catastrophic decline. The worst being the Diocese of Durham, which has declined by 15% and now has only 10,000 regular worshippers on a Sunday.
It's twice the size of Irreverent.
It is twice the size of Irreverent, and we're hoping in the coming year to grow to the size of the Diocese of Durham, which would be really good. If we could both grow in the right direction, if Durham could turn it around and we could carry on growing.
How sad, isn't it? I mean, think of Durham, that there's an area in terms of poverty where the Christian faith is really needed. Yeah. I mean, if medicine is needed spiritually, it's in that area, isn't it, in terms of deprivation.
Daniel, can I just need to correct myself. I said it was a 15% decline. I meant it was a 59.3% decline. So wow. 26,800 to 10,900.
It's shocking, isn't it? Really?
I misread the chart. But you
think of all the great saints who have gravitated around Durham, Holy Island. The Cuthberts, the Bedes, and here we are.
Michael Ramsey and his association with that area as well.
It really is staggering, actually.
It's terrible. And also, if this decline continues, the church will basically almost cease to exist within 20, 30 years. I mean, if the decline continues in this fashion. Now, this article is suggesting that one of the main reasons is because we've abandoned the one parish, one priest system. I don't necessarily want to get into that because I think it's slightly too esoteric for what I want to ask, but I want to ask you about the juxtaposition here, because many of us do feel that there is something going on spiritually in this nation and indeed across the Western nations of the world, but it's not happening in the Church of England quite clearly, because we're seeing this catastrophic decline. So what's going on here, Daniel? How do we understand this ambivalence?
I would say that a number of things have failed to our benefit, including new atheism.
Right.
And we've seen that with the person of Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
That he has moved a whole slice of young intellectual millennials, people who are hungry for truth, who feel that they've been sold, a pottage of nonsense over many years. And here is someone who's saying, who's pointing to the Bible, for instance, and saying, we ought to look at this with reverence and see the great truths in that. And though he's doing that from a psychologist's point of view, we have to see that is truly significant.
And despite the fact that he's not a Christian himself.
Yeah, exactly. But he's intensely sympathetic, and he can go on the Jonathan Pageau YouTube and cry. Yeah. To the point where he says, I'm so terrified that this actually might be real. And I don't know what this would do to my worldview.
Yes.
Yeah. And when we see people like him, and as Douglas Murray has noted, a number of his previously agnostic, atheistic Christian friends are moving, as young bright things back to Christianity and giving it a second look.
Yeah.
And I think where the revival is it's in a classical form of Christianity. It's in a form of Christianity that doesn't poo-poo 20 centuries of memory, holiness, tradition, aesthetic beauty, liturgy, the early church fathers, the great intellectual movements. I'm not saying it's anti-Reformation, far from it, but I'm saying it's somehow, this is a movement that takes in the whole menu and is doing so in a very intelligent way. I think what we're finding as well is that for a lot of these, and I think it is broadly millennial, they now have access on the internet to the whole Christian tradition.
Yeah.
You can, if you want to, in the past, if you wanted to say read Augustine's City of God, you'd have to find a bookshop that would have that. There'd be a lot of, why bother? Well, it's now at the click of a button, you can get it, and then you can get lectures and what have you around that are stimulating, interesting, deep, and really what this classical Christian revival is giving is as with Augustine's City of God, it is giving an alternate vision to what we can be as human beings. And it's very sharp, I think, and cutting edge. And the sort of progressive liberal form of Christianity is being found to be an emperor with no clothes in comparison. So that really, I think what we're going to have in a generation or so time is this will be the major form of theology.
Yeah. Okay. So Daniel, just let me, I think you're right there, but let me ask you, why is this bypassing the Church of England? What would you, if you were in a position where, like, say you were the Archbishop of Canterbury, what do you do to acknowledge this phenomenon, and what are we not doing in your view?
What we're not doing, I think, is, again, going back to Jordan Peterson, we're not filling auditoriums, as Paul did in the church in Athens. We're not going into the marketplaces with this, and giving it as it is. Instead, our leaders are completely churned up in a management science view of reality. I think this is a very much a sort of the poison of the baby boomers. Yeah, is that the revolution in the end comes down to paperwork, bureaucracy, projects, initiatives, and so on. That there is a sort of a retreat to the armchair. Yeah, and a feeling that anything weird in Christianity, anything odd, supernatural, quirky, is going to be unfashionable and put people off, when actually it's quite the opposite. People want the mountain. Yeah. And instead what they're being given is the playground at the bottom of the mountain. And if our prelates, some of our prelates, took a leaf out of Peterson, who knows? They too could fill auditoriums. But
what people want, Daniel, I would suggest, is people want depth and they want challenge. They don't want fluff. They don't want chaff. They don't want things which are easy to digest and which taste sweet in their mouths and feel pleasant in their ears, because they have that all day long, every day. Netflix, Amazon Prime, Spotify, they have it already. What they want is something that feels rough and earthy. And you know what, Daniel, I was thinking, the scriptural thing that occurs to me is the discussion between Gamaliel and the other elders in the book of Acts, right? So the new Christians, Peter and James and John, I think it is, they're called in and they're beaten and they're sent out, and they say, don't preach this message anymore, right? But then Gamaliel, who's a senior rabbi, who was the one who taught the Apostle Paul, he says, look, we need to think a bit more carefully about this, because if this really is something which is of God, then regardless of what we do, to persecute them, we will fail, and we may even be found to be opposing God.
Absolutely.
So we need to have a Gamaliel moment, I think, where the church says, actually, what are we paying attention to here? Are we paying attention to what the Holy Spirit is truly calling us to, or are we paying attention to worldly things? And we need a moment, in my view, of spiritual discernment.
Yeah, and I think what we have in the appointment of senior leaders is a tendency to pick good administrators.
Yes.
And I'm not sure that this is the age for that. This is not the age for a church full of people who have MBA type skills. There's a place for good stewardship, but I think what we need is prophetic voices. And by that, I don't mean, repetitions of, Liberal Democrat, the greatest respect to Liberal Democrat. This is a Tom Holland quote,
recently.
Sort of Liberal Democrat, wishy-washy, woke, progressive, world photocopied ideas. What we need is the gospel of miracles, and then we're not getting that.
Yeah.
It is very frustrating because Peterson has shown it is all there for the taking.
Yes.
People want this, and you know what? It's not a high church thing. It's not a low church thing.
No.
I think most of the people who've knocked on our door are not particularly concerned what flavour of Anglicanism it is. In fact, many of them are more prayer booky, middle of the road.
Yeah.
We've never actually seen a revival in that section. They just want it done well. They want to know that that the light is more powerful than the darkness. Yes. And they're not getting that. That message is being obscured. And it is very frustrating because here we've shown that we can have more people attending. Well, we are, with a smartphone and a good microphone.
Yeah.
We have got half the number of people following us that is from one of the most struggling dioceses. We're half of where Durham is.
Yeah.
With a phone.
Yeah, with a phone and a laptop. I mean, that's what.
Does that not? Is someone in the Church of England not listening?
Yeah. I mean, I agree. And we don't. Look, this is the thing, Daniel, is we don't want to be. We're not being big-headed about this. All we're doing is we're saying like we're not really doing very much, and yet people are tuning in. People want to hear. People want to hear deep and rich conversation that takes Christianity really seriously. And to go back to the thing you said about the Reformation, I think that's so important because we are a reformed church, and the big mistake when people think about the Reformation is to think it's about just what happened in the 16th century. It's not. It's about a principle, semper reformanda, always reforming. And to me, that means about always going back and re-resourcing yourself in the foundation events of Christianity, in the Christ event, in the scriptures, in the church fathers, in the people who have resourced themselves through the church fathers, and so on and so forth. So that's what we need to do. We need to continually reform this church. But excitingly, very excitingly, Daniel, on that note, we have been joined by Dr. Paula Boddington. Paula, it's great to see you. Thanks for being with us today.
Oh, it's great to see you too. Thank you very much for having me on. I hope I haven't interrupted a critical discussion by...
No, not at all.
It's not an interruption, but it was certainly a deeply critical discussion.
We were just putting the Church of England to rights.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, Paula, I heard on your interview with Jonathan Pageau that you turn your laptop round so that you yourself are facing in the direction geographically of the people or the person you're speaking to. So you were facing Canada when you were speaking to him. Now, are you doing that? Are you doing that today? And if so, who are you facing?
Well, you see, I couldn't do that because you're in different directions, aren't you? And I don't always do it, actually. I did it because I was talking to Jonathan about technology. It was at that point that I suddenly had a thought about it. And also the next day I was going to I used to live in Australia. So I was going to talk to people in Australia. And I think it's partly the pandemic and the feeling of being so far away from people that made me think about it. So I am probably I'm probably facing actually midway between both of you, because you're in Cornwall, aren't you, Daniel?
Devon,
Devon, yeah.
Plymouth-wise.
Same thing.
Yeah. I'm probably like at the intersection. If you drew an angle, I'm probably facing there, so I could go like this.
Yeah. Well, that's probably the best. That's probably the best way. I think that's probably the best thing you can do from a geometrical point of view. But I'm sure we've got your absolute full focus on Zoom. So the technology is good for something, and we're not actually talking about technology today necessarily. But this is one of your areas of real interest, isn't it, Paula, in IT and I don't really know how you say it, but like technology and how it pertains to the future of humanity. It's one of your interests, isn't it?
Yes. Well, actually, so actually both in relation to what you might call technology is such a broad term, isn't it? What you might call medical technology. Right. So I've done a lot of work in relation to medical ethics, and including what you might call technology or developments in science, because I worked for a long time in issues related to clinical genetics and genomics. Yeah. But then for the last, I think I started in about 2015 when I was at Oxford. I started working on ethical issues in artificial intelligence.
Right.
Which is actually completely and utterly fascinating, actually.
Yeah. I have to put up my hand here. So I'm fascinated by that too, and fascinated what you've said. I've also had time with Jonathan Pageau and interested in his journey, and Rod Dreher and others. Yeah. I in the 80s did a computer science degree, and I've kept a fascination for AI, and then in theology did a lot of medical ethics. So it really resonated. Thank you for what you've contributed, I think, to that discussion. I ended up talking to my son last night about, I think, one of the interviews that you did with Pageau about the danger of us all becoming sort of social media worker bees.
Mm. Yes. Because actually a lot of the myth about AI, a lot of it's myth. It's very complex, but the pictures are, it's going to be like super robots, super intelligence, and AI is going to be cleverer than us. But if you look at the reality of it, a lot of it is people working in the Philippines doing content moderation for vile stuff on the internet. There's a lot of it is actually really appallingly paid, awful, repetitive work. Not at all some vision of great sort of leap forward of humanity.
Yeah, so it's like a new form of serfdom, isn't it? It's like a kind of technological serfdom. So people aren't, like mining cobalt out of the children aren't mining cobalt out of the sand with their bare hands, but people are sat in front of a screen tapping on a keyboard doing repetitive mind-numbing tasks for no money.
Yes, and also I mean the computers technology that we're using is produced by people in China and places like that, working in terrible conditions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Picking up. So yeah.
So Paula, let's come to you, and then eventually to the issues that we're going to talk about today, because really we're going to hone in on this specific topic of medical ethics, and I think we're going to talk hopefully in a way which is interesting and insightful about the situation vis-a-vis the COVID vaccines and what's been said in the public sphere, and the intersection with the church. But I think it would be good to get a handle on who you are for people who don't know you. So you are, for a start, you're a regular church attending Anglican.
You got that because I said that in my irate letter to Justin Welby that I sent you. When I say regular, it's not like I go every single Sunday. Sometimes I go twice, and some Sundays I don't go. So.
Okay, well that's okay. That's okay. I mean, the word regular does a lot of work, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But that's just to say that's your context. You're not coming at this from as an outsider or from an antagonistic position, but you are actually, you have an emotional and spiritual stake in this, because you are part of this church too, this church that we love and we want the best for. So we're starting from that perspective. Now let's talk about your professional qualifications and your experience. So do you want to just give us a broad introduction to who you are, and then maybe tell us a little bit about how your experience and your qualification relate to this issue of vaccination, and particularly with reference to the COVID-19 vaccines?
Okay, so a sort of a potted biography of my sort of academic background. I'm a philosopher. my first degree was in philosophy and psychology, but I was at an undergraduate at Keele, which at the time you did loads of mixed arts and science. So at school, I mostly studied science. And then I think it's actually probably relevant. My main interest in philosophy was ethics, right. But I did a DPhil at Oxford on the topic of that was actually self-deception. And one of the reasons why I mentioned that is because it sounds like a really obtuse sort of abstract thing to be doing a philosophical degree on how people could deceive themselves. But it's actually been a really handy guide to life, yeah. because it's set me up for always thinking about how we form our beliefs and how we might think something's rational or irrational. And that's actually far too simplistic. So that I've worked in terms of, I've done a lot of work in applied ethics, both teaching and in research. So in medical ethics. So for example, I said this in my letter to Justin Welby, just to sort of, because I was actually rather furious and I wanted to sort of put it all on the line. I've worked for a while in the medical science division at Oxford University looking at ethical issues. I've worked at Cardiff University in relation to clinical genetics and I work part-time with a team of people who do research into the hospital care of people with dementia. Right. But also I've also had this interest in new technologies. So I worked for a while in, I'm still working, I'm writing a textbook at the moment about AI ethics. I worked in the computer science department at Oxford University on a project for a while, funded by Elon Musk, actually.
Yeah.
Wow.
Great.
Oh.
Very cool.
He has very interesting views on this, doesn't he?
Yes. He had nothing to do with, I don't think he had any influence about the work I was doing. In fact, I wrote a book from it. And at the end of it, I thought, well, since he funded the research, I should send him a copy of the book. And I couldn't even get a reply from any of his people or anything about where I might post it. There's no contact whatsoever. Wow. I'm too low down the food chain.
He's in some space station, on geostationary orbit.
He's an amazing guy, isn't he? And now your official title at the moment is Associate Professor of Philosophy and Healthcare at the University of West London.
Yes. Okay. So what I'm talking about today is not to do with I'm working on a team. We're working on a research project. Various research projects trying to improve the care of people with dementia who are in hospital.
Right.
So, but I also work with a lot of medical sociologists.
Yeah.
So I think you can approach these issues from a very sort of medical ethics point of view. But when you start looking at the sorts of things that medical sociologists have to say about healthcare practices, it gives you a sort of more rounded view of some of the things where people might want to critique and try to improve what's actually going on in healthcare.
Yeah. Okay. Now, should we ask? Can I ask a kind of general question? Because basically, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about specifically the comments that the Archbishop of Canterbury made about encouraging people to get vaccinated and boosted. And your response, as you've said, you wrote a letter to him in which you took issue with a number of things that he said. I think it's fair to say. When we talk about medical ethics, just more generally, have you been concerned over the last 2 years about the way that medicine and science as concepts have functioned in the political sphere?
Well, yes, I have. I mean, there are so many ways in which I'm concerned about it. One of the things I want to say at the beginning, actually, is because one of the main ways in which I'm concerned about it is how society is being divided.
Yeah. In
terms of, so I'm concerned about a lot of the rhetoric. I think we need to look at what's going on in terms of the rhetoric, and I'm concerned about how notions in public health are being used in ways which I think are just a bit too crude. Yeah. I'm concerned about the ways in which people might be being coerced in various ways, but I'm really concerned about how people are being divided. So one of the things I want to say at the beginning, I mean, partly because there's so much rhetoric around about people being anti-vaxxers, including thinking that anybody who's skeptical in any way about the vaccine is an anti-vaxxer, and including the ways in which rhetoric are about, follow the science or the science, when if you are a scientist, what you do is try to test and doubt. And that's following the science. That's a methodology to try to test what we know, not rather than uncritically believe it. But I mean, actually, so in conjunction with the work I'm doing on the hospital care of people with dementia, I've just been looking in the last couple of weeks at research about the impacts of loneliness. Yeah. So it's been known for some time that loneliness is one of the risk factors for developing dementia. But it's also known that loneliness, in terms of, there's one thing, number of social contacts, and the other thing is the feeling of being lonely, which is something separate. It actually can impact directly your cognition, in particular your emotional and social cognition.
Yeah.
And of course, that's one of the factors of the pandemic. So people have talked about how fear is dividing people, but just sheer loneliness itself. And there's been research on this, probably not enough research, but there's already research coming out about the impacts of the pandemic. So yesterday I read a paper that came out last year, which was looking at loneliness, its impact on how we related to other people, just from the first 20 days of lockdown, when it was 3 weeks to flatten the curve. And in those 20 days, the people who felt most lonely, it leads you to interpret faces more negatively. So you're more likely to see them as hostile or as a threat. And it leads you to be less cooperative. You know, they do tests with little online games. So one of the things I want to stress is that means when we're all, not all of us, but there's a tendency in society to think, oh, the other side are trying to force me to be vaccinated. Oh, the other side are anti-vaxxers. So I just really, and everybody knows that there are families ripped apart by stances on this. So one of the first things I want to say is that I just want to think, try to get away from.
Isn't it interesting that there was this low resolution thinking in those first 20 days or so, where the weather was glorious, if memory serves me right. We had a very early summer.
Yeah, there's some nice,
but out went the edict.
Opportunities for some garden parties.
Yeah, exactly.
Which were missed by most people.
Out went the edict, I think from Michael Gove, that we should stay indoors. And we should only have a set hour or so of exercise, when in fact what we needed was vitamin D. We needed exercise, and the ability to see people even from a distance would have been very beneficial. And it's probably likely, I think, I just remember reading some report article on this that said, that thousands of people needlessly died as a result of that loneliness and being sealed hermetically in their houses. It was just not good for them health-wise. And it seems so obvious, doesn't it, really, to anybody? It's a sort of grandmotherly wisdom that actually what we need to do is get out and about and get some sunshine, because that kills bugs.
Yes, and anxiety. So the CDC did some research looking at, I think it was about 500,000 people who'd been in hospital with COVID, looking at the risk factors as to what was going to lead to the worst outcomes. And I think I'm doing this from memory, but I think the biggest risk factor was obesity. But I think the second was anxiety. And so people have been propelled, people who were already prone to anxiety, that's raised, and people who had never been anxious before in their lives are now anxious. So when I read that report, I thought, all right, I'll stop worrying then.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it struck me that the whole thing, I mean, I've thought this since the very beginning, the whole thing was just so intellectually facile. And from I would say that I'm sort of instinctively conservative. And so the idea, like you'd associate with a philosopher like Edmund Burke, is that society grows up organically through, or if you like, a series of informal experiments, and you find out what works, and then like an organism, it grows. And all right, it's not perfect, but generally speaking, people have ways of living and society has ways of operating which work, generally speaking. So if you say, right, we're going to have a lockdown, we're going to stop everything, then from that conservative perspective, for me, alarm bells were ringing immediately, even just on an instinctive level, because I was thinking, hang on a second, there are going to be consequences to this. And these consequences are going to be wide-ranging, and they're going to be unforeseeable. You cannot possibly understand the significance of what this is going to mean for people's lives. And of course, for people like you who study things on an academic level, which means detail, which means depth, there's a huge amount of distress, because you're thinking, well, hang on a second, why has nobody thought about, for example, people with dementia? Why has nobody thought about people who are elderly and who might be suffering from isolation and loneliness? And this just goes on and on and on. I mean, something I find particularly distressing is when I hear about people who have autistic children and how lockdowns affected them. But these things were not considered because of this blunt, I mean, it's hard to think of a more blunt public policy decision, isn't it, than just everyone stay in your homes and no real consideration given to the consequences.
Yes, yes. I mean, because you might think that even for 3 weeks at the beginning, that doesn't really matter. But actually, as we said, as of that paper yesterday, even 3 weeks makes that kind of difference. But it's for blunt approaches to what actually, well, there's several things I could say, but one of them is a blunt approach to what actually counts as health. Yes. So ways of achieving it, there are risks and benefits, aren't there? So I mean, let's just take one example from work I do with dementia, but there's an understandable fear of elderly people on hospital walls having a fall, because that can have major consequences if you're elderly and you fall. Yeah. But because of that, there's often a great deal of caution about stopping people from getting out of bed. Well, then, especially the older you are, the more time you spend in bed not doing anything and not exercising, you go into a decline, you decondition really rapidly. So what I'm saying is that trying to achieve the best health is a complex of factors. It's always going to be weighing one thing off against another. But one of the things that has really struck me is the narrow conception of actually what counts as health. So we've known for a long time that health is not just physical health. We need to look at mental health as well. And even actually, there's not really a sharp divide because, we're connected, because we're embodied, we're embodied creatures. Yeah. So we know, but actually the World Health Organization has got a definition of health, which then broadens that further into including social health, because you can't really separate out your own you can't separate your physical health from your mental health. You can't separate your mental health from the health of what's going on around you. And actually, I prepared my homework for here. A few years ago, I came across a definition of health, which comes from Australia, from the National Aboriginal Health Strategy Working Party in 1989, which I found really inspiring, actually, because it takes it even further still. So, I mean, most people listening will know, I mean, the health of the Aboriginal people in Australia have been treated. When I went to live in Australia, obviously I knew the situation was bad, but I was actually really taken aback at how badly the Aboriginal people were being treated, and their health status in comparison to the mainstream population is absolutely appalling. So this definition is Aboriginal health, and actually we can't quite translate the word health into Aboriginal languages because they have a much broader conception. Aboriginal health is not just the physical well-being of an individual, but it's the social, emotional, and cultural well-being of the whole community, in which each individual is able to achieve their full potential, thereby bringing about the total well-being of their community. It's a whole of life view and includes the cyclical concept of life, death, life. Health to Aboriginal peoples is a matter of determining all aspects of their life, including control over their physical environment, of dignity, of community self-esteem, and of justice. It's not merely a matter of a provision of doctors, hospitals, medicines, or the absence of disease and incapacity.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's a wonderful.
Why is it then, Paula, do you think that governments have used such blunt instruments, such low resolution thinking, particularly conservative governments who you'd think would understand that and celebrate that kind of nuance?
I don't know who can comprehend the inner workings of Boris Johnson. Who? I don't know.
I mean, it's
mystifying, isn't it?
I think it's an as much as it's. I mean, I think it's lots of things, but it's got to be an optics issue, isn't it? It's like, this is going to look bad, so therefore we have to do something about it. Yes. And actually, in the moment, the consequences, medium and long-term consequences, were just not considered.
No, well, I think possibly one of the things going on is in terms of optics, in terms of how things look, because people dying, it's a similar in the hospital wards. Somebody having a fall, you've got to report it. It's something really, really visible, but other things might be less visible. So, I mean, this is something that happens a lot in technology. Things that we can measure, the things that go into data, we get taken more notice of as well. And there are certain things that are more salient to us. So it's actually also really quite interesting then that how we make judgments. Yeah. There's a lot of talk about risk benefit and making the right decision, but how we all make judgments as human beings is going to be influenced by things. We're not rational We're not like little machines. We weigh things in various ways. So I think possibly because the government was thinking, oh, we're going to be responsible for so and so many deaths.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why. But I mean, I actually have no idea. I mean, I really find it hard to comprehend politics, actually.
Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
people make those decisions. I've got no idea.
Well, it's probably a good thing because it shows that your mind isn't twisted by these kind of considerations. But Paula, let's come now to the issue of the COVID-19 vaccine, the way that that's been spoken about in the public sphere. Now, you very kindly shared with me a letter that you'd written to the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, and we've also, I don't know whether you've seen, but we've also seen Pope Francis making comments, which I think in some ways are even more extreme, or at least even more unambiguous than the Archbishop of Canterbury's comment. I think he described taking the COVID-19 vaccination as a moral obligation for Catholics. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, said before Christmas, and I think he's actually subsequently repeated this on Radio 4, that it is an act of neighbourly love to be vaccinated and to be boosted so that we can reduce the transmission of this virus and therefore protect the people around us. I'm not sure that there was much more. I think that's a fairly good summary of what he said. I don't think there's much more to it than that. Apologies if I've missed something out. I want to be fair to him. I don't want to misrepresent him, but I think that's basically what he said. Now, lots of people might hear that and think, well, yeah, that makes sense. If you're vaccinated, that reduces transmission and therefore protects people. Even if you're only
Yes.
if you're only helping a small amount, why not do it? Now, you obviously have a different perspective. So do you want to sort of let us into what your perspective is and what is your reasoning?
Okay, so the interview that I'd seen reported, and then I watched it again and made a transcript of it for the relevant bit. The thing that really got my goat was that the interviewer asked him if it was a moral issue, and he said yes, it was a moral issue. And then she was asking him, is it? Have I brought it with me? Hang on. And she asked him something about, I've lost it now. Oh my God. She asked him whether or not it would be, is it immoral not to get vaccinated? At which point, there's an opportunity to say, oh no, of course it's not immoral not to. Yeah. But it's the same rhetoric about, oh, some people might have medical reasons, but if you haven't, and it was clearly to me implied. If you said to me, is you think it's immoral to, I don't know, something, and I don't reply.
Yep.
And if I said to you, Jamie, did you eat that last slice of chocolate cake? And you refuse to answer, what am I going to conclude? So that's what I thought. I mean, maybe he needs more training in how to conduct interviews. Right. But I had a reply from Lambeth Palace to my email, not from him, obviously, because he's too busy. But the reply didn't say, oh, of course, he doesn't mean that.
Yeah, it doesn't deny it, does it?
He didn't say in the reply. He didn't take that up. So, and also I think, one of the things I think about it is that individual decisions about what to do medically are often very nuanced, or in fact, life is very complex. So it may often be the case that you think somebody hasn't made the best decision. That's not the same as saying they're immoral.
Yeah.
Because there are lots of different things that go into our decision making.
Have you heard, we listened to Steve James, Dr. Steve James.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
He's done an extended interview on Unheard, which I'd recommend folks to. And it's lovely to listen to, because you feel here is the best of British in terms of a doctor who can operate in a world of nuance, pastoral care, medical competency, and understands that each patient is different and autonomous. I thought it was extraordinary. I felt quite proud actually to listen to that. I thought, what a fantastic medical practitioner. Why is it that everybody isn't talking like this?
Well, yes. So that's, in a sense, that's the essence of my concerns about what's been going on. So, Jamie, you were saying a while ago, just a little while ago, you were talking about Burke and you're sort of inherently conservative and things growing up over time. So what has happened over time, basically over the 20th century and sort of now, is understandings of medical ethics and healthcare have been developing both in law and in ethical regulation of doctors. and in things like case law, where we can gradually come to an understanding about what the relationship should be between doctors and patients, and the notion of informed consent in medicine. And it seems that as we progress, we've moved away from a paternalistic idea that the doctor knows best, and certainly away from any kind of authoritarian way of looking at things, that society or the government can tell individual people what they must do in relation to their health. And so a lot of my concerns are that we're losing that nuance. So yes, I haven't quite finished watching it, but I really enjoyed that interview. But you say, what a fantastic doctor. I would agree, but he's only doing what the General Medical Council say doctors should do in terms of individual patients. So that's one of my main concerns. Yeah. But also in terms of the Archbishop, people like the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Pope coming out and saying things like that, but really, really lack nuance. So that in the interview, for example, I mean, I've just complained about Justin Welby implying that people are immoral. I'm not saying I don't want to say he's immoral, but he is the Archbishop of Canterbury. So I'm giving him some constructive feedback here. He actually said he didn't really understand anti-vaxxers, didn't understand why people were not getting the vaccine. But that's the problem. He doesn't understand. He just doesn't understand.
Yeah.
So we're just helping him to understand a bit further. So but it's the clash between there's an idea that, oh, public health and everyone has got to do this, as if this is something new, and which is riding roughshod over all the last decades or the last century or so of people trying to really think about medical ethics and the practice of medicine, and gradually improve things and really be focused on patient care. And if you like, we can talk about patient autonomy, but it's really talking about respecting patients' individual decisions and understanding that a medical decision is not like something based purely on reason or based purely on technology. It's about a person, they're very complex individual situations.
Isn't one of the problems is that having suspended that kind of Burkean idea of that everything in the end comes down not to systems but to people, and every situation is different. Every patient, every person has different needs, rather than dealing with a collective. That what we have had, maybe in the last sort of 10, 20 years, particularly, this has been brewing in the background, is this more kind of digital, clunky view of reality, which is everything can be reduced to zeros and ones, and likewise people and systems, and we're sort of consumers trapped in a sort of collectivism, really. That I mean, I was struck recently how a number of articles have picked up on that authoritarian states often begin with healthcare scares. That cleanliness on a ground, or that there are a group of people who are particularly unclean or should be unwelcome in the social sphere, and that this is sort of, that history doesn't repeat itself, but it has these rhymes.
Yes, but actually, new technology is often pushed by focusing on medical benefits, or it's. So, for example, Elon Musk's mad idea about these neural implants in your brain. That's pushed through saying, of course, it could be of great benefit to people who are paraplegic, for example, which it could be. But you over and over and over again, you'll see that the technology is pushed by saying these are health benefits are overriding. Yeah. But also, so one of my concerns is that what's happening and what's been happening in the last 2 years is that significant changes in the relationship between the NHS or the medical profession as a whole and individual patients are being brought in, but really would need to have, if we're going to make these changes, they need to have great public debate and discussion. So, I mean, to underline it, just to prove that it's not like me saying this, because I've an academic done my homework, I have brought along, so for example, some guidance from guidance about informed consent and getting informed consent from patients, emphasises that it applies to all healthcare decisions, including vaccinations. So this is from the General Medical Council. how should doctors seek an adult patient's consent for vaccine? This is about COVID-19 in particular. Doctors must be satisfied they have consent or other valid authority before they provide treatment to patients. Our expectations are the same before they administer vaccines. Right. So it's not a special case. We can't sort of say, oh, you've got to have it for the benefit of other people. That's against General Medical Council guidelines. And in fact, in particular, guidance about decision making in terms of children, vaccinations are seen to be, where is it? I've lost it. Here we are. Vaccinations childhood vaccinations come under a special category of a small group of important decisions. So if parents disagree about something, so for example, in terms of non-medical circumcision, if there's a disagreement, or vaccination, if there's a disagreement, it's not to say, oh, well, the default is vaccination. It's a small group of important decisions where if there's disagreement between the parents, it has to go before the courts. So I just want to emphasize that in terms of saying, what's happening now is that, oh, vaccinations, oh, never mind, it's just a vaccination, just have it. It's quite a significant change to be going down that route.
So, Paula, I mean, to return to the Archbishop's comments and the sort of broader context, I think what you say about him saying he doesn't understand, I think that's potentially the most significant thing about his comments. And I'll just put this out there. So he is the head, however you understand that, of the Anglican Church. So 80 million Anglicans. He's got immense spiritual significance as a Christian leader. Now, it seems to me that there is something, and I want to choose my words carefully here, but it seems to me that there's something verging on abusive to say to people, you must have a vaccination in order to protect other people. And the reason particularly when he's saying he doesn't understand what their reasons are. And the reason, well, one of the reasons I think is that the vast majority of people who are not being vaccinated because they have done a risk-benefit calculation in their own minds, and they feel that for themselves, they believe that for themselves, that the vaccine may pose a greater risk to them than COVID-19. And that's, I mean, it's just cards on the table. That's my basic reason. I have other things I could add to that, but that would be my basic, that's where my starting point would be. If somebody asked me, why are you not vaccinated? It's because I know I've been on the Oxford University website and I've done their risk calculation, and I have something like a 1 in 150,000 chance of dying from COVID-19. I imagine it's even less now with the Omicron variant. And I am not confident that my risk of death or injury from the vaccine is better than that. In fact, I suspect it's very much worse. So that's my reason, right? So if somebody then comes to me, especially a spiritual leader, and says, you must be vaccinated, I'm thinking, hang on a second, you're telling me to do something that I consider to be dangerous to myself in order to get this tiny net benefit for ostensibly for the people around me. Now that's what it means to be loving. But I'm thinking, hang on a second, you're not being loving towards me.
Yes, that's what I thought. Yes,
because you're not taking into account my concerns about my health.
Yes.
So this is an inconsistent viewpoint.
Yes.
Go on.
That's one that could be weaponized easily. The Archbishop of Canterbury says. So, you're only there a few steps away, aren't you, from, though he hasn't said this, others sort of picking up on that and riding with that and saying, well, you're despicable then.
Because you won't put yourself in harm's way. You're immoral because you won't take what you consider to be a risk for the benefit of other people. That's essentially what the implication.
Yes, that is the implication. So I'm sure I know there are people who have taken the vaccine because of other people, because they think it's a benefit. So that, if you like, that is a neighbourly thing to do. But as you're right, it's not being neighbourly to the people who have got reasons for not taking it. It's not being neighbourly. So if we take this sort of mythical crazy anti-vaxxer, let's suppose there is a crazy anti-vaxxer out there. Supposing they are literally crazy, whatever that means. Is it neighbourly to tell them that they're immoral? So supposing somebody is an anti-vaxxer because they're frightened that the state is going to force them into having a vaccine.
Yeah.
What do you do with that person? Force them to have a vaccine?
Yeah.
And they're right. So it is a lack of compassion, but also in terms of there's medical law which is really clearly on the side of the patients, I would say, in terms of free and informed consent. But there's ethical regulations for doctors, but law only operates against a certain background.
Yeah.
And in particular, for the law on consent, there's two elements. It's got to be free and informed. So in terms of the level of information, how that's gone, the level of information that you have to provide for a patient is actually, the standards are actually really pretty high. So ordinarily, obviously it depends on the circumstances, pragmatics. If you go along, if you're knocked unconscious and taken into hospital with, like in a road traffic accident, they just treat you straight away. It's an emergency. Or for certain routine things, they wouldn't go into all the ins and outs. And the standard information has got to be matched with what the patient is concerned about. And you mentioned doing a risk benefit of your particular risk of dying of COVID versus vaccine. But of course, that's completely and utterly valid for individual circumstances. That would be the sort of thing you'd have to provide to patients. But when doctors have to provide informed, make certain that patients are actually informed about it, they have to make certain that they understand what the patient's own particular values and beliefs are.
Yeah.
Which is more than just values about your health.
Yeah.
How much then is a break from medical ethics tradition, where countries like, I think Greece has introduced €100 a month fine to those who are unjabbed over the age of 50, and so on and so on. It seems like the European Union and parts of America and Australia. In China, it's a completely different ball game, where you're just completely ostracized from society if you don't do this. But how much of a break is it from the tradition of medical ethics to actually fine people for not taking this?
Well, it's horrific. It's just complete. It's a complete and utter break, because I have no idea what the medical ethics situation is in Greece, but it's a complete and utter break. And also, it's a slippery slope, isn't it? When people use slippery slope arguments, they're often poo-pooed, but as if, that will never happen, or scaremongering. No. But slippery slopes exist. We can point to them. It's science, but slippery slopes happen. And if you're talking about the vaccine, what's next? Obesity, not eating your 5 a day.
Yeah. Smoking has just been banned in New Zealand for certain age groups, hasn't it? So there's an age group beyond, if you were born after a certain date, you will never be allowed to smoke in your life in New Zealand.
Maybe you take it up.
Yeah, not allowed to take it up. Yeah, alcohol.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about, they're going to be banning communion wine next? You're going to have Ribena instead.
Yep, exactly. So let me bring it on to something related. The Archbishop, after he made those comments about, he doesn't understand the quote unquote anti-vaxxers, he then said, when he was asked about his reasoning or what he would say to these people, it was essentially, I'm not a scientist, so I trust the scientists. And you should trust the scientists as well, which really, I think in some ways is a very insightful comment, because what it indicates, what it illustrates, I think rightly, is that this really, for the vast majority of people, is an issue of trust. It's about who do you trust, right? Yeah. And you might say, I trust the scientists, but this is a weakness, I think, in his argument, because you can't lend your own trust to other people. So, okay, Archbishop, you might trust the scientists, you might trust Big Pharma, but I don't. So what are we going to do about that? You can't just tell me, I can't conjure up trust out of nowhere because you have it.
Yeah, I totally sympathize with that. And I've mentioned this before in this podcast, as a teenager, had an extreme allergic reaction to an antibiotic, which ends up that I'm allergic to a whole set and possibly other sort of various substances. So, it's at 14, if you've spent a month in bed,
Yes.
and you then subsequently hear that half a dozen people die with similar allergies every year in this country, the parliamentary debate gets nowhere, that pharmaceuticals are still selling this, that in fact, some of these antibiotics are given willy-nilly in ICU intravenously, which would finish me off within about an hour. That doesn't give you confidence. I struggled to, having had my eyes open to that debate over the last 30 years, I've found that somewhat chilling. So I find myself very skeptical, really, and scientific pride and vanity can also, and money can push people and organizations to do things not always to the benefit of the patient.
Yes, so I completely agree. It's a really good point, Jamie, about you can't tell somebody to trust. You can't swap it around. It's not a commodity like that. But also, trusting the science is such an incredibly stupid thing to say, because science is always developing. But also, medical science is, human bodies are unbelievably complex things, and we know that there are problems in science with issues about replication. It's a replication crisis. We know that you might get findings in a study and another study shows there's sort of greater nuance, or we got it all wrong. You also know, you also see that there are groups of scientists who have different opinions about it. So when we look, for example, at the data, the use of statistics and so on to interpret the data and understand what's going on, it's incredibly complex. So you might get people who genuinely disagree what the data actually means. I remember this when this really struck home to me when I was in. I used to go to weekly seminars in the medical science division at Oxford, and there was one seminar in particular about routine use of mammograms for breast screening in older women. And it just really struck me that there was an Oxford group who thought that they were really beneficial for women of a certain age group, and then people from Cambridge who were more skeptical and thought they did more harm than good. I think that these are all genuine, high-notch scientists. But it's like the Oxford people tended to think one thing, and the Cambridge people tended to think another. So it's not as if they're doing anything wrong, but how you view these and interpret them. So when Welby was talking, he trusts the science. What science? What about those people who've been sort of banned from? Who was it? That chap from I forgot their names. Who was banned from Twitter and so on.
Oh, Robert Malone. He was.
Yes, and the professor of evidence-based medicine at Oxford.
Oh, well, that's his name will come to me in a minute.
Yes.
I know who you mean.
Yeah.
What was it, Daniel?
Carl Hennigan?
Hennigan, yeah, that's it.
Yeah. But also the other thing, you made a point when you talked, Daniel, when you were talking about, well, 2 points. One, in terms of your personal experience, if you've had personal experiences, it's like, okay, aeroplanes are the safest form of travel. But if you have been in an air crash and survived, you might never want to go in an aeroplane again.
Yeah. And Paula, can I ask you about this? Because say how much you're comfortable with, but from my perspective, so when I said that thing about trust, for me, I'm happy to trust sort of individual doctors, but I have to say that I'm very, very skeptical about the pharmaceutical industry. Yeah. And this is something that I've only really started to read about over the past couple of years because I wanted to inform myself. But it seems there are a number of things which are massive warning, like big alarm bells in my mind. One of them is the censorship issue. It seems to me that the pharmaceutical industry have a huge amount of influence in social media, in technology companies, and in the corporate media, and that the policy has been to censor, and you wrote this in your letter, to censor information that might cause so-called vaccine hesitancy, even if the information is true.
Yes.
Even if they know it's true, if in their mind it's going to lead to a psychological problem for people vis-a-vis taking the vaccine, they will censor that information. So for me, that's not something which cultivates trust, right? If you say, no, actually, you know what? you're going to take this vaccine and I'm going to withhold information. So essentially they're withholding the possibility of informed consent then, because they're actually taking away your opportunity to be informed. And then there are various other things, like the way that I don't believe the pharmaceutical companies are upfront about injuries from pharmaceutical products. And I think that this is a major issue. And when I look at the COVID-19 vaccine rollout, I think, well, we've got the yellow card system in the UK, we've got the VAERS system in America. These systems are we all know that they're flawed. And so if they are this flawed, how will we even know if this vaccine or this set of vaccines, how would we even know if they are injuring people and if they are safe? And yet we're being told over and over again that they are safe. In some cases, we've got people saying like these vaccines are 100% safe. Children, for example, I was just reading today, all of this kind of stuff. Added to that, the fact that the pharmaceutical industry has legal indemnity from injuries from these vaccines. And as you write, again, it's very, very hard to sue the pharmaceutical industry. So they've got very little accountability financially. To me, I'm trying to convey that in my mind, there are a constellation of issues here, which cause me serious alarm.
Yes, you're quite right. So when they're talking about trusting the science, it makes it sound like they're just like totally disembodied, disinterested people just doing science in a lab somewhere. But the pharmaceutical industry is an industry. It's incredibly expensive to develop drugs. It's incredibly expensive to bring them to, and they're selling them. They're commercial industries, and the history of the pharmaceutical industry is absolutely appalling. It's absolutely appalling. I also want to say that actually, even a lot of people are skeptical, they fail to have trust because they've seen that even abuses in medicine, like testing things without proper ethical guidance, or going and testing drugs in Africa and India because the ethics guidance is less than it. We know that happens. But the pharmaceutical industry is known to have taken part in all sorts of really dodgy practices, including, for example, not publishing negative results. So I actually grabbed some books off my bookcase. This book here, The Truth About Drug Companies, How They Deceive Us and What to Do About It. It sounds like it's written by some crazy anti-science person, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Written by Marcia Angel, MD, former editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine.
Right. So a crazy anti-vaxxer, obviously.
Yes. And so, so the reason why we have the yellow card report, the reason why we have that system is because of drug companies withholding information, but also because of the fact you test something in a clinical trial and you need to carry on monitoring it for years before you know whether or not what all the results are. So that's why we have the system. And in terms of trust for pharmaceuticals, in common with millions and millions of other people, I was prescribed antidepressants, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. I was only on it for about 6 months, but in common with a significant minority of people, I had absolutely horrific problems trying to come off it. It would take too long to tell you all the side effects I had, but I had to taper off it really, really slowly. And for the best part of 20 years, I was part of a class action case trying to sue the drug company that made this particular antidepressant, which basically failed on a technicality. I won't go into all the details. So I have seen firsthand how there were scientists on our side validating that this particular antidepressant had a particular problem with withdrawal effects. I did an LLM in medical law and did a dissertation about litigation against pharmaceutical companies. Meanwhile, because I was on the steering committee for this group, I know that for exactly the same issues, the same pharmaceutical company was making out-of-court settlements up to millions of dollars with individuals in the United States. But because the law's different over here, they didn't. But also because these are out-of-court settlements, nobody knows about them because you have to sign a non-disclosure.
Isn't it? And isn't it strange how only up to a couple of years ago, you could make a good movie or documentary on how many people in, say, the United States are hooked to prescribed drugs.
Yes.
And how no one seemed to have the will, whether politicians, pharmaceuticals, to actually do anything about this. And that this was becoming a sort of mental health pandemic. I mean, I watched horrific videos of people who are on mainstream antidepressant drugs, painkillers, and are totally hooked on this. And this has been normalized. And it's funny how that discussion suddenly gone all silent. There's radio silence on that in the last couple of years.
Yes. Yes.
We're employing the same people who've screwed half of America. Well, never mind.
Yes.
Sorry, I was just going to say another film worth mentioning as well is the Dallas Buyers Club. If you've ever seen that film, which is it's extraordinary to my mind that this film was actually made, but it chronicles the suppression of life-saving treatment for HIV sufferers because the pharmaceutical companies were trying to market test and market a toxic lethal medication called AZT.
Yes,
it's extraordinary.
Yes, it is extraordinary. So I mean, actually, there's so much. There are so many aspects to this, but we could go on talking for a long time. But I just one of the things to note as well in relation to this is even how, which comes up a lot. It sprung to mind talking about things like antidepressants, is how we even think about disease, what model of disease we have, and what model of disease and health we have. And so obviously there's a lot of talk about, which seems to have dropped out of the picture, the notion of medicalization, about whether or not we go down a route where we take pharmaceuticals, go down a route of having as many vaccines as possible and all the rest of it, versus different ways of trying to approach this. So that's part of some of the reasons why people are hesitant to get the vaccine, because if they'd rather rely on getting their own health. So that's a perfectly valid reason. So one of the things to point out in terms of how the medical law in this country stands, you have the legal right to refuse medical treatment for any reason or for none. You don't have to give a reason. And the doctors have to respect that. So the GMC give guidelines what to do if you disagree with a patient decision. You still have to respect it. You might need to give them more information and make certain that they're be informed.
You would ban them from the cinema.
Yeah. But so in that unheard interview, Freddie Sayers kept on saying, but shouldn't people be encouraged? Shouldn't older people be encouraged to get the vaccine? Depends what you mean by encouragement. Yeah, give them the information. They should be given the information. Yeah. But to encourage them is actually sort of coercion. So the steps that doctors are supposed to take to prevent coercion are really, really quite great. So, for example, if you go along to the doctors with somebody else and you think that your mother or whoever it is trying to push you in one direction, then you're supposed to see the patient on their own to check they're not being coerced. And I've worked with doctors who are concerned that the very fact that you're practicing in a hospital is sort of implying that therefore medical treatment is the best thing to do. So it's specified that one of the options that patients should be told, the option of doing nothing. So,
well, again, that was very pertinent, wasn't it? Again, a few years ago, I remember Michael Mosley's series about how we've all got hooked onto antibiotics, and there were all these sort of discrete webcam fly on the wall pictures of people going into the GPs, and essentially the GP thing is the easiest thing to do is just say, oh, we'll have an antibiotic, when they don't need it. And what they actually needed was really rest, hot drink with lemon. And I think they found that even when people were offered lemons, honey, and a box set DVDs, they were still sort of, well, you sure I don't need the antibiotic? No, you don't have a viral infection, you don't have a bacterial infection, you don't need this. And this will have an overall negative impact on our ability as humans to deal with serious infection if we over apply antibiotics. And I find it extraordinary that on the grander scale of things, we're now using vaccination in a manner that we would never use antibiotics 2-3 years ago.
Yes, yes. So I'm just thinking, but there's so many different things to say when I'm trying to get backtrack and thinking about that Archbishop's.
Oh, dear Archbishop.
Thing. But yeah, so but that point about overuse of vaccines. Who is it who's just come out and said that we can't keep on vaccinating indefinitely? We can't keep on doing it. It has an impact on your immune system. And so one of the points that Steve James was saying is in terms of like long-term data. So people might get counted as anti-vax if their position is my own particular risk is fairly low, and I might have the vaccine when there's more data has come in. Because one of the things that which people vary in terms of what risks they want is how wary they are about novelty. So you might be offered a new drug which looks like it might have a profile than the one you're on. You might say, oh, I'll have the one I'm on because it's been around for a long time. Or the other person might think, oh, I'll have the new one. You can't say one's right and one's wrong. So people vary in terms of how much they're prepared to do for novelty, but also there's no right answer about the risk because it is unknown. One of the things doctors are supposed to do is to talk about the level of uncertainty. So one of the things that we've never done before is give people a booster vaccination of the same vaccine every 2 months indefinitely, which is one of the things that seems to be suggesting we haven't done it. So to think that you're an anti-vaxxer, if you think, is this loving my neighbour?
Yeah. Well, this is the problem I have is like the coercion, like the coercive language, the othering. You know, and this is the thing I think that people, you know, when they make comments like the Archbishop of Canterbury did, they're not helping the conversation because they're not addressing people's concerns. Like I've said, like I've tried to outline my concerns about, for example, the pharmaceutical industry, and I know that the reaction in lots of people's minds will just be, you're just a crazy conspiracy theorist, you're just an anti-vaxxer, etc. And I don't know what to do with that, because all I can say is, no, I've read books, I've read articles, I've watched films, I've watched documentaries, and I know this stuff is going on. And I can't just act like I don't, and then, as I say, just go ahead and trust these people. So all I'm saying is, all right, you might totally disagree with me. You might think that I'm completely mischaracterizing the pharmaceutical industry. But if you want to convince me, you have to deal with my concerns. You can't act like they don't exist.
Yes, you have to. So we're talking about conspiracy theory. It's just such a terrible label. It makes it sound as if there's never been any conspiracies. They're not conspiracy theory. If you think that the pharmaceutical industry has in the past behaved atrociously, you're not a conspiracy theorist. You're a conspiracy factist.
Yeah, I mean, you can go on Google and look. You can go up on Google and look and type in pharmaceutical litigation.
Yeah,
and the numbers are eye-watering.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's the most important point, is that, you know, well, as far as I'm concerned anyway, is that if this conversation is in any way going to become a credible conversation, then the people who are not being vaccinated need to be understood.
Yes.
The concerns need to be addressed, and we can't have this situation where you're not allowed to say anything beyond a kind of prescribed narrow band of things. And if you do, then you are labeled a conspiracy theorist or an anti-vaxxer. It's just, I mean, it's not going to do anything. All it's going to do is drive division. And for you know, from a spiritual perspective, from the perspective of a churchman, surely what we want to do is we want to discourage division and ostracization, and we want to bring people together. And the great, to my mind, the great liberal tradition of our culture is to encourage adversarial conversation. You know, our law courts are based around that principle. Our parliament is literally set out in an adversarial position so that both sides of an issue can be heard. And I think, you know, this is something we need to rediscover, because the road we're going down at the moment is, you know,
well, the Church of England, Church of England is supposedly one of its on the tin sales pitches it's this great intellectual establishment that supposedly allows for an enormous amount of diversity of opinion, and yet on
No comment, Daniel.
On medical, on these and many other issues, particularly this medical issue, we've got no nuance and there's no space. I mean, I suspect there are clergy who are terrified of putting their head above the parapet on this, and the Archbishop has just made that 10 times worse. There are people who say, well, if vicar so-and-so is not vaxxed, maybe I shouldn't receive Holy Communion from them because, A, they're immoral, and B, they might be medically infectious.
Yes. There's such lack of nuance and such lack of debate. And also, even about if you express any skepticism about the vaccines, or you say you haven't been vaccinated, there's always an assumption that you are, you then fall into the crazy totally against it. So I mean, just take the example. I'm very, very skeptical about the use of antidepressants, but I wouldn't ever say to people that, people forget that depression can be a really life-threatening illness, and that for some people have benefited from them. I just want more information, and I want them more nuanced, and I want more caution about their use. I'm not anti-medication.
No.
I just want a more global. It's the same with I've been vaccinated up to my eyeballs. I've had every childhood vaccination. I've had vaccinations for traveling to sort of Asia and so on. But I make a different decision about this. I also had, I did actually have, when I was in my 20s, I had an incredibly bad reaction to the TB vaccination. I was ill for years. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a bit skeptical, because I never really got a satisfactory answer from the doctors treating me exactly what was going on. I had to take TB medication for 10 months in the end, and I was incredibly ill for most of my early 20s. Never really got an answer. But that's not mean to say that makes me more cautious, but I'm not anti-vaccine. I'm not anti-doctors in general.
Oh.
I'm not really sure what an anti-vaxxer even is, to be honest with you. I mean, it seems to be a kind of sort of bogeyman type creation. I mean, it's ostensibly somebody who is completely scientifically illiterate, who just, for some reason, refuses all vaccines and won't, and wants to kind of spread this kind of ideology, this kind of anti-vaccine idea. I mean, honestly, I've never met a single person like that in my life. And the people I know about now who are skeptical about vaccination have very good reasons for being skeptical. And as I say, just calling people anti-vaxxers does absolutely nothing to the conversation or help in any way. But we probably need to wrap things up in a minute.
Yes.
Let me give you an opportunity. I mean, have you got any sort of parting thoughts or anything that you feel like you haven't said, which you want to get off your chest, or anything at all to as a final thing to say?
Well, I suppose there's lots more things that I could say, but just as a final thing, if you're going to, the main message is the problem about how a sort of very blunt public health message about getting vaccinated and trying to get as many people vaccinated as possible, plus the government's nudge unit and so on and so forth, has been translated into driving a sort of coach and horses through ideas about treating people as individuals, and with respect on whatever position you want to take. So I do want to stress, there'll be people listening to this who've been vaccinated. Make your own personal decision. Make your own personal decision. But really, really, please do not. This could be seen as an absolutely terrible opportunity to totally undermine many people's trust in the medical profession and in the government and divide us in society. That's the very, very last thing that we want, the very, very last thing we need, because that is how the fact that we've been living such isolated lives, some more than others, in the last 2 years, it's absolutely devastating on mental health, devastating for society. So we should just treat people with respect and understand that they've got good reasons for doing. And also, actually, lastly, even if there are some crazy anti-vaxxers out there, can't we as a society accommodate them as well? We allowed conscientious objection in the Second World War, but when we've talked about vaccination before, we've never wanted every single person. We've always allowed, but some people would turn it down.
Yeah.
I would add to that considering the Archbishop's comments, isn't our sort of constructive criticism that particularly the bishops need to come into some of these spaces and have an open discussion an open, deep intellectual discussion, thrash it out, rather than just seemingly go along with the crowd on this, and to be seen to be understanding. That is good counselling practice. And if the church isn't doing that, Archbishop, come on to our podcast with.
In all seriousness, Daniel,
and actually have this discussion.
If there are bishops listening to this, or if there are, as I know that there are senior people in the church who listen to this, or if there are people who know bishops personally and want to invite them on the show to talk about this issue, to have a proper dialogue, we will do that. We will facilitate a proper, respectful dialogue. If anyone, any bishop, is willing to have such a conversation with us, that's an open offer, serious, genuine offer. As I say, I think we've been going now for a couple of hours. I'm sure people are loving this, but we always want to leave people hungry for more. So I think we should probably wrap things up. Before, Daniel, I'll ask you to give us a blessing or something to finish off. But before we do that, I just want to say thank you so much, Paula, for your time and your insight and your courage and willingness to speak up on these issues, which they're difficult issues to talk about in public. There is always the fear that there will be backlash and difficulty as a result of raising these concerns. So thank you so much, and we really appreciate you coming on.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. It's been interesting and fun.
Yes, so it's been brilliant to have you. Thank you to all our listeners for being with us today. I won't repeat all the notices, but do connect with us in the ways that I mentioned at the top of the episode, particularly join our Telegram group, follow us on Twitter. If you'd like to sponsor the show, you can do so on patreon.com/irreverence. Daniel, could you finish us off with some kind of deeply spiritual blessing or the equivalent?
Yeah, of course. I can't find it at the moment. I was just trying to Google it, but in the dark comedy "Don't Look Up," Timothy Chalamet has a wonderful prayer as the comet's about to strike Earth, calling himself a secret evangelical, and the family are having a Thanksgiving meal. But I'll have to see if I can find that prayer and give it to another time. But it's a prayer about hope for the future for humanity. But a similar epiphany-tide prayer then, and a blessing for us all. May God, the Son of righteousness, may his light dawn upon us all as we look to this new year. May each of us know his love and his light now and forevermore. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be with us and remain with us evermore. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you once again, Paula. Thank you, Daniel, as always, for your time. And thank you to everyone for listening. We will be with you again next week.